success, wealth, recognition. Gary Cooper had it all, lost it all, then turned a revolutionary discovery into the success paradox. Here's Gary.
My guest today is Noah Asher. Noah believes that everyone has an important purpose, even amidst life's most overwhelming challenges. His new book, Chaos: Overcoming the Overwhelming, provides a powerful guide for navigating through difficult times and emerging stronger on the other side. Noah, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Gary.
Noah, reading the book and listening to some of your other podcasts, it's crazy how much you and I have in common. I can't wait to talk to you and uncover some of this stuff. This is my gift to you to help get your book out there, and not just the book, but to help people, right? That's the goal.
Yes.
Is to help people. There's a lot of people experiencing chaos. I love your description, and we're going to get that out there today. But, the goal is to help people. So let's do that today. All right?
I would love that. Thank you so much.
All right, dude. So tell me the story. Why the book? Why'd you do it?
Yeah, years ago, I was incarcerated and tried taking my own life. And in that season of just a deep, dark pit is the best way to describe it, I felt like there was no way coming out of the pit. So I wanted to just die. And I knew I knew who God was, and I didn't really feel like I had a relationship with him at that time. And so I was calling on him like, God, I've heard so much and I've read so much how you love me. Well, if you love me, don't leave me here to die. And he didn't come through. So I got angry with him. And then I took matters into my own hands and tried taking my own life. And looking back on those moments, obviously that didn't work because here I am. But looking back on those moments, I realized that the reason the pit seemed as dark as it did was because I thought my purpose no longer existed. And I realized there's so many people, whether it's incarceration or addiction, like I've struggled with, or maybe it's divorce, maybe it's the loss of a loved one or illness. Those things, when we experience those deep, dark forms of chaos, a lot of times we're left questioning life. We're left questioning, where do we go from here? And so I wanted to write this book to help people answer those questions of where do you go from here? How do you bounce back?
It's crazy. You and I experienced kind of the same thing in different ways. And you talk about chaos being something that you experienced, and yours was one of the worst, that a human being can experience. But it doesn't have to be that extreme, right? It can be, you don't feel fulfilled, or it could be a work thing or a divorce, but you were willing to put yourself out there, to help other people. And so why is that? Like, why was putting your personal experiences out there, why were you willing to put yourself out there and expose your vulnerability to do that? It's pretty extreme, right?
Right. And that's a great question. In fact, my team and I struggled with whether or not to include part of my story in my book, was because we thought, are you going to lose some of your, what we call like authority, like the authority to talk about certain things if people know that you've been incarcerated? And I was like, oh, I agree. And so we paused for a minute. And after just praying and really looking through it all, I realized, hiding looks like guilt first and foremost, and guilt can lead to shame. And so I didn't want that. But also too, even deeper than that, was I didn't want to go into these places. Like I like to go into these prisons and rehab centers and talk about my story and stuff, and let these guys and ladies know that, hey, you can overcome, and give them proof. And that's one thing that I wanted. Was I never wanted someone to go, well, you just don't know what I'm going through. And I don't hear that, because they're like, okay, you did. And when I say that, it's funny. You see some guys like they're slumped back. They're just kind of listening. And then when they hear, oh, he's been here, he's done this.
He's one of us. Yeah.
Yeah. Now they're like, click, with the pen, they're taking notes. They're all about it then, because they're going, okay, let's do this. And for me, I'm so thankful for the men and women who came into the places I was in and was trying to tell me I would get through it. So thankful they showed up. So no offense to them, but sometimes they would tell me I'm going to get through it. And I'm like, am I? Like, how do you know that?
You don't know what it's like. Yeah.
Right. And so I'm glad I could share some of my story for anything other than just to give people hope that they can overcome. And I talk about incarceration in my book, but it, like you mentioned, it doesn't just stop there. While editing this book, I lost my father. And I actually am the one who walked in and found him dead. And that was traumatic in a lot of ways, of course. So I told the editors, I'm like, hold on, I need the book back. I want to add this into the book because I want to let people know who've experienced loss. Hey, I know how that feels. And I don't recommend that ever be in a conversation. I dislike when someone walks up to me and goes, oh, I know how you feel, brother. Like, I don't want to hear all that. But I just want people to know, like, hey, I've been there. I've been in that deep, dark place that you're in now. And here's a guide. Here's a way through.
Well, I told you we have a lot in common. So I witnessed my dad dead, upside down in his cabin at the farm. I also had religion, but I didn't have the relationship. And I'd like to unpack that with you a little bit. Then I had this what I would consider this despicable past, and I didn't know how to get over it. And then I ended up putting it in a book. And so you and I, you probably know this quote. I love this quote. It talks about, never shut the door on your past. And I thought this past would be something that I would never, ever, ever get over. But now it is an asset that I can help people, like you were talking about, in a terrible situation. And I remember that guilt and shame and remorse you were talking about. Now you've turned that into an asset by going into the prisons and all that. I do that as well. So let's go back to that, if you don't mind, that religion and relationship. I was thinking, and I don't know how many people do this, but I act this the way I used to act. I thought if I just went to church on Sunday or to synagogue or wherever they go, I thought it was like something I checked off my list. Like, hey, I'm a good guy because I do this on Sunday. But the rest of the week, I just did things my way. It was like something that was on a shelf and it was compartmentalized in my life. And then I just went about it Gary's way the rest of the week. Is that kind of how you did it? And then what changed?
I jokingly say, like, I knew the hymns, but I did not know him. And that for me was what it was. It was going to church, and I played guitar, or I still play guitar, but so I even would play guitar on stage. And it's funny that it's like I knew the songs. I knew I could quote John 3:16, I could quote all these things, but it was just the best way to describe it. You described it so well, is that it was checking off a box. It was like, oh, this is part of my day. I grew up in the South, and so Sundays, your butt better be in church, right? That's what you're taught. And for me, it's so funny. I grew up so Southern that if you did miss church, but you wanted to go out to eat at lunchtime, you better dress up and look like you've been to church.
Yeah.
You don't wear sweatpants. And so that's kind of like where I grew up. And because of that, yeah, like church played a major role, like in part of my daily routine. But, I went for other reasons too. Like I liked music. And so we had a great worship music that played, and I liked a specific girl there. So that led to wanting to go. And so you have all of these reasons why, but they weren't the reason that I should have been there and growing. But it's kind of funny when I look back, that foundation though was there.
That's right.
And I'm so thankful, because as a Christian, I believe that, these verses, we can hold them in our hearts, and they'll come out at the right times in a lot of ways. And I experienced that. Like while I was in my deepest, darkest pit, a verse would come to my mind, and I'm like, oh, I haven't thought of that verse in forever.
Yeah, I think that's right for me. That's the same experience I had, and I guess it kind of goes back to, we had a foundation built on rock. We didn't know it, right? But I think the difference came for me. I never knew what the word religiosity meant. I personally I didn't like all the rules and the formality and all that stuff of quote unquote. And again, it could be a synagogue, it could be whatever someone's religion is. For me, it's Christianity. But I didn't like the rules, and I think I was just looking for excuses not to be a rule abiding person, and so I would be judging other people. Hey, that guy, he does all this good stuff at church, but then he's not following it either on Monday through Saturday. So that justified me doing whatever the hell I wanted to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Then I learned the difference 7 years ago. It's been 7 years for me. So then I learned the difference in spirituality. And that's what you were talking about, that relationship. So like, no matter where I am, where I go, what I do, I have that spirituality where I feel connected all times with God, no matter what the rules are, no matter whether I go to church or not, no matter whether if I was Catholic, whether I'd follow, it doesn't matter what the rules are. The scripture that I love in Philippians, have that peace that passes all understanding. Whether I grace the doors of a church or not, I have that. I do grace the doors of church. But I used to go to church to be seen, for people to think that I'm a good guy. Now I go to church and I don't care whether people see me or not. I go to hear the message. Have you experienced the same kind of thing, that transformation?
Yeah, it's I enjoy going because I want to hear what I feel like God's going to have for me that day, and digging into his word. I don't care. Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't care. I don't look around. I don't really care who's there that Sunday, who I see or who sees me. I go to a very large church, but I don't care about, some people use it as a business way to connect with for their business. And I've seen that so many times. They don't even bring their Bible, but they bring their business cards.
Yep. And I used to judge people for that, but now it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I just don't care. I don't really look around. It's they have their own thing going. I say it all the time, is I've needed grace in my life, like we just talked about, as you can see. And so I love to extend it. And so I don't look around to see. So many people in this world we live in, especially with social media, they look for people's flaws and they love to call out people's flaws. And that's called shaming. And for me, I don't care. Like, I don't care what their flaw is. It's not my role to.
Well, I love this saying, if I'm pointing a finger at you, I have 3 or 4 pointing back at me. And if I can spot it in somebody, I probably have it.
Yeah. That's true.
This is a good segue to a question like, how did faith, help you overcome chaos, and how can faith help other people overcome it?
Yeah, first and foremost, to overcome something so heavy, no matter what the chaos is, it's heavy for us in that moment. And I equate it to, I believe all sin is equal in the eyes of God. And so it's also, I believe it's the same with our chaos. He doesn't look at my chaos and go, oh, Noah's got more going on, let me focus on him more so than Gary right now. No, he loves us all equally. And so he's focused, he's worried about all of our chaos. So I never want someone to look at my situation and go, oh, well, it's raining heavier on him than me. Like, we're all struggling. And so I think this applies for everyone, no matter what their chaos is that they can overcome by first and foremost understanding that their pain does have purpose, but their pain was never their purpose. Like, there's more to their life than just living in pain. And that is the hope part of, hey, you're going to get through this because you have something to look forward to. And then I speak with hope, help, and humor throughout the book. That's the hope part. The help part is more of giving practical steps. First thing for me was I talk about in this chapter called Eeyore syndrome, where I talk about how we have to stop walking around like Eeyore going, woe is me. The cloud is always over my head, and changing the narrative and saying, okay, no longer am I going to sit around going, God, why me? I'm going to start saying, God, use me. And like you talking about where you go to these places, that's God using you versus it just sticking, like where you walk around like Eeyore going, life will never be better than this. And for me personally, a story in the Bible that really resonated was Joseph. And he was thrown into a pit by his loved ones and he was left there to die. But then they were like, well, we don't want him to die. Let's just sell him into slavery. And so they
sell him.
Yeah,
Our
so
brother.
right, their own brother. And then they put him into slavery, and then he goes to prison for something he did not do. And then finally, this was from pit to the palace, was 13 years of his life. And he stands before these guys, his brothers, who started all of this chaos for him. And he looked at them and he said, you know, what the enemy intended for evil, God used for good to save many. And those 3 words at the end of that verse, I never paid attention to, but they were so important, is to save many. And it was reality that, oh, like, this is bigger than me. God's not only turning things around for me, he's turning things around so I can help others.
Well, that was one of the questions I had for you. You know, you and I have seen addiction and in some of the worst ways. And in the last 7 years, I've probably seen 50 people die, you know, that I know, or that I've been around, I know, or I've tried to help personally. And, fentanyl is laced in a lot of the heroin and stuff like that. Some people have just literally drank themselves to death.
Wow.
And that is an ugly way to die. And so one of the questions I had for you, and that is a beautiful way to connect it, why us? I don't dwell on that at all now. You and I and a lot of other people are the lucky ones that were chosen. I call it chosen. Like, how did we get so lucky to be blessed and chosen out of the depths of hell to be chosen? And I think it's a good analogy for people. Look, we have friends that have gone through different trials, friends that have lost babies, friends that have been through terrible divorces, friends that have overcome cancer, friends that have overcome so many different things, yet they still persevere. I wonder how we're chosen to be like Joseph and keep that attitude. And what you were talking about really is like the law of attraction or manifestation. You're choosing to stay positive and see something positive. How have you helped others do that?
That's a good question. I think that for me, I always go back to the foundation of word is crucial for me in my life, but it's also looking in other circumstances for people who are struggling with the loss of a child. I've never experienced that, and so I don't recommend coming to me as your first option for counseling. But you can come to a book like this and go, okay, we've overcome different things, but we can all overcome. But for that deep build of resilience, I think starts with finding people in your community that have experienced similar chaos so you can learn from them. Maybe they're 3 steps ahead, closer to the finish line of overcoming their chaos. Learn about those 3 steps, learn why they're 3 steps closer, and learn some of that. But I do understand with recovery, especially with addiction, but also just with chaos in general, it's hard to ever say someone has they overcame, like past tense. A lot of time it is present tense of overcoming. Like addicts, they're recovering. It's always that ing on there. And it's the same with loss. I talk about in the book, there's a guy, a friend of mine, he was 16 and he was my age. and he died in a car crash. And my friend's dad was the first one on the scene because he was a fireman. And he was just responding to a 911 call. He did not know he was pulling up on his son's accident. And he runs over to the truck, he pulls his son out, and he watches his son take his last breath. So I talk a little bit about that in the book because I want people to understand chaos does come in life that way. But here this man is now, years later. One of our favorite pastimes as youth was to go to summer camp. And that was my friend's, one of his favorite parts of the year was summer camp. And so now that father, he raises money throughout the year to send other kids to summer camp that may not be able to afford it.
You bring up a good point. I think that's, what I put in the book that I wrote was, and what I learned in recovery was always giving back. The way I stay, I think, in recovery, like you said, it's active, is helping other people. And it is the old saying, the more I give, the more I receive. Because I think, I have this friend, he says his brain is trying to kill him. And for whatever reason, and I read a lot, like you and I were talking before the show, our brains are kind of wired to look at all the negatives because we were animals trying to stay alive in the wilderness, right? So I'm looking at all the negatives rather than the positives. So I'm looking at how much is in my bank account, how much, what's my competition doing, whatever. And so instead, when I'm out there helping somebody else, like you and I are doing today, I'm in the positive. And so that's good advice if you've lost somebody or if you've been fired or whatever, it's getting into action, doing something else rather than focusing on your own wounds, because that is a dark pit. And that's kind of what I did when I had hip replacements and back surgery. I just thought, woe is me. It kind of brings me to your father. And I know this may or may not be difficult for you. You put it in the book. My father was this guy. We called him the Santa Claus of healthcare, or the Robin Hood of healthcare. He was just an amazing guy. Everybody admired him. He was successful. He was cool. It was also hard to live up to. It was really hard to live up to. It sounds like maybe your father was as well.
Yeah, at the funeral, in fact, somebody came up to me and goes, "I just saw your dad yesterday." I said, "Really? Where?" And they said, well, I saw some vehicle stalled out on the road, and I saw a man trying to help this lady push her car off the road. And so I ran out there to help, and I looked over to the side, and I realized it was your dad. He was out there just helping somebody already. But that's what he was. He would just stop and help people, and he was in the air conditioning business. And a lot of times, just to get called out to help someone older fix a thermostat, it'd be $80 to $100. That's just because you don't know what you're getting called out for. It's just the base pay, right? And there'd be so many times where he would just go and help others. And the day that he died, he never stayed home from work. And he went to work, and then he came back home because he's like, I just feel like I have a stomach virus. And so he was so upset, though, because there was an older lady he was supposed to go over to her house that evening to put a thermostat on. And he wanted to do it as side work instead of let the business charge. And of course, he died, so he never made it there. And I remember someone he works with came to the funeral, and they were like, "Is there anything we can do for you and your family?" I said, "Yes, there is a lady who my dad was so upset he could not make it over to her house to put a thermostat on. Please do that. Please do that for my dad. And please do not charge her," because that was the whole thing. And looking back, it's like, if my dad were alive, he'd be in big trouble for trying to, not do that for the company. Like you said, Robin Hood. But I'm like, he's dead. So there's no consequence there for him. So I'm like, let's just go ahead and put it out there. And the guy looked at me kind of crazy at first, like, how would I know that? And I'm like, because that's who my dad was. So please do that. And he texted me a few days later and said, "It's done." And I was like, so thankful for that. But looking back, especially because my dad was around during my biggest chaos, and he was so supportive. And so the day that he died, he just said he wasn't feeling good. So when I was at their house, I went over and I was like, "Hey, Dad, what do you want me to get you for dinner?" And he just didn't wake up. I rolled him over and I realized he was gone. And that was so difficult. And for me, I felt such heavy guilt, as if he was there for me through my chaos. Maybe if I would have tried to wake him up sooner, I could have helped him in while he was suffering, or while he was, I guess, having a heart attack. We never found out what it was, but because of that, I lived in that stage of guilt, that part of grief for a while, and it brought back my former chaos, where I was like, God, he was helping people, and I feel like I'm not doing what he was doing. I said, I wish he would have rather taken me than him, and I had those deep, dark thoughts for a while.
The reason I ask you that question is, my own experience was I was trying to live up to other people's expectations, right? And one of the biggest was my father, his expectations. And he didn't necessarily put them on me. I superimposed them on myself, right? He was, in my view, he was almost perfect. And that's how much I admired him and looked up to him and loved him. And a lot of other people did as well. So then there's this giant shadow over looming. I don't know if you experienced that. You're shaking your head, yes.
Yeah.
So then it was like when I realized that, and for a long time I was the good boy and did everything right. But then when I ended up having some medical procedures and stuff, and I realized things wouldn't be perfect, I was like, well, screw it. I'm going to go ahead and be really bad.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Right.
Did you experience anything like that? I mean,
yeah, I experienced that a little bit when I first definitely got out, even like my own chaos, because I heard so many horror stories of you only took like a few years sentence, but it's really a life sentence because of the way the world treats people with incarceration. And so at first I was like, well, why try? Why try to do right if there's no option? And I realized that wasn't the case, but I've seen so many people, especially with incarceration, who, they don't feel like they can live up to what they're supposed to do. And so they just go crazy. They do the opposite. And I've seen the downfall of that. And what they realized is they thought their chaos was keeping them from doing, better things. And so they ended up doing worse things, which produced what? More chaos. And so they kind of reverted back to their old ways. And
I'm so glad you were willing to share that, because both you and I now, children and people, want to get rewards. They can be negative or positive, right?
yeah.
And so when I didn't know this at the time, but when I was getting positive rewards, I kept doing more of those. And then when those didn't come, I started getting negative rewards. And children are a good example to use for that, right? And so you and I both, when our chaos came, we started doing more chaos, right?
Right.
And so for those people, who get fired, a lot of times they spiral out of control, right? Have you seen others that have followed that same behavior?
The first thing that came to my mind, especially when you're talking about job loss, that's the same example I wanted to give. So thank you for asking. But when I first got out, I took a job for a popular hotel chain, and then I moved up to become the general manager. And as a general manager, there's times where we would fire people, and I would see some of these guys who would try to turn their life around, and they would get fired. And then now they're doing anything they can for money. And it's like, what they don't realize is they're about to produce a lot more chaos for their life. And so, of course, maybe selling drugs or robbing somewhere or doing other things, but they were acting out of fear, and also just out of desperation, and that desperation was causing more chaos for them in the long run. I've seen that happen to many people, and I think that desperation, a lot of times when we're fighting, is that fight or flight that we all have in us. That fight sometimes is dangerous when we become so desperate for out of our pit that we'll do anything. And sometimes anything, when it's open-ended, can lead us to some very bad things. I mean, that's coping 101, right? Some people, find drugs to cope with. They find humans, other people to cope with. And that can be just as dangerous. And so it's making sure that when their life is spiraling out of control, it's leaning on and holding on to life support that is better for them. For example, finding your friends and family that are positive influences and leaning on them and holding on to them sometimes is maybe all you have in that moment, but that's all you need in that moment. And
that's a good point, Noah. So how do people, you're touching on it now, instead of using bad coping mechanisms when people are going through chaos, what are some of the ways they can maintain hope during chaos?
I would say first and foremost for me, and I think for a lot of people that I've worked with, is perspective. It's understanding that you may feel like your pit is deep and dark now, but it could be deeper and darker. And so it's holding on to perspective, knowing that life is bad, but it could be worse. And so I'm going to point toward, to a better outcome than that. That's first and foremost. But again, I can't stress enough how important it is for family and friends. In fact, I told someone the other day who does not struggle with alcoholism, but they were talking about how they need community. And you know what I told him? I said, go to AA. And he laughed. He said, why would I go to AA? I don't have like a problem with alcohol. I said, go to AA because you're going to find community there who does not judge, who is just there. So just go and sit, listen, but also become a part of the conversation. And when you connect with some of those men and women, you're going to realize, oh, okay, I'm not alone. Like we're all suffering. It may be in different ways, but we're all suffering. And so he did that, and he's been going ever since, which is funny in a way, but community is everything. And so I personally recommend church, but if that's not for you, then go to find community elsewhere, like whether it is AA, I don't recommend the bar, but find community somewhere because you want to get with people who are like-minded, but also are focused on and striving on being better. That's the goal. I think a lot of times we feel like the people who we can vent to the most that means that that's a good thing. Sometimes the people we can vent to the most are the ones who are really just listening to you to hear that, oh, well, they have it worse off than I am. And so what you don't realize is sometimes the people you're venting to, they're not there to build you up. And that's what you want to find. You want to find people who can build you up.
Build you up, challenge you. I have a friend. This is a good example of doing what you just described. I have a friend who had a really, really sad divorce that he didn't want. Most men that I've witnessed go through divorce, most men start going out to bars, sleeping around, and drinking a lot, just reacting rather than responding. This guy did. I was just shocked when I saw it. And I was on my personal recovery journey. When I say recovery, I don't mean just stopping drinking. I mean learning how to live, how to cope better with life. And so this guy ended up joining a men's Bible study, seeing a counselor 3 times a week, and joining a gym. And in less than a year and a half, he was healthier, happier, and ended up meeting his high school sweetheart and ended up getting married, then remained friends with his ex-wife. I was like blown away.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It could have gone the exact opposite way.
Yeah.
And very little resentments. And he was tragically hurt. So those coping skills that you described earlier were really great. And instead of, you called it hiding and shame about how hurt he was vulnerable and told people how hurt he was.
Yeah. That's such an important part. And, actually, where you talk about how he worked out, I think that ultimately is a big part of why some of us we struggle with overcoming our overwhelming, is because a lot of times overcoming is like working out. Like if I want to lose 30 pounds right now, I can't just work out one time and then I see results. It's a constant, consistent workout that has to take place to get to that place of my goal of weight loss. And I think the same applies for our chaos. No matter what kind of loss we've maybe experienced or divorce, any of those things, it takes working out spiritually, mentally, emotionally. It takes working those things out on the daily before we ever see results.
Yeah, man. Well said, Noah. Well, hang on a minute. We have to stop here. Well, coming up next time on Success Paradox, Noah Asher, the author of Chaos, Overcoming the Overwhelming, will talk about the importance of forgiveness.
We may have an opportunity to attack, whether it's on social media or attack them physically, whatever. But sometimes we have to just understand that's not our place and just forgive them. And that's easier said than done. I can promise you that. But that is a major part of rebuilding.
To learn and practice the Success Paradox lifestyle, visit GaryCCooper.com. The Success Paradox is a production of Forbes Books.